Please give a huge welcome to my friend, Molly Meng.
Okay, let's get this party started. Oh, maybe I don't need my glasses. I am a firm believer that each of us is made up of layers of everyone we've ever met, every dog we've ever pet, every interaction we've ever had, all the connections we make, the brief, the extended, the good, even the bad. This exchange of energy with all living things creates the layers that I'm made of and make me a more full human. And even more important, I'm convinced every layer I acquire makes me a better human for others. I see it like a cross-section view of a rock formation. The strata that makes me begins with my parents. Raised in Los Angeles in the 70s and 80s, I know I'm super lucky that my first layer is my mom and dad, Kick and Dick Meng. My parents demonstrated an incredibly positive way of being in the world. Their way of interacting with everyone they came in contact with, the neighbors, the customers and artists of my dad's business, the teachers at our school, the people that worked at the grocery store, the guy at the car shop. All of this firmly established my unwavering belief that there is always opportunity for connection, for engagement, for adding another layer to your being. And though they never said it out loud, my mom and dad, as well as my 4 older siblings, showed me how to move through the everyday as if strangers were just friends we hadn't met yet. I'll never forget when I was in college, I spent a study year abroad in Wales, and my parents and one of my brothers came over to visit. And the main thing they were looking forward to, 2 things. 1, sitting in the pubs, hanging out with the locals and drinking beer, just so they could talk. And my mom, absolutely convinced, even though we knew where we were always going, wanted to drive down every country road and ask a farmer for directions because she knew that those would be the most winding, wonderful conversations that would take forever. Anything for a story. So this is my beginning layer. This is who I come from. A family that is actively looking for random interactions that lead to deep conversations. Learning everything they can about people, eye contact with every person and every animal, sharing thoughts, experiences, and ideas with all humankind. My family has shown me since childhood that this is how you get the most out of life. This is how you gain the variety of layers that make up who you are, the best person you can be. So my approach to life, my artwork, my workshops, the community projects I create, all of it points to this George Eliot quote. This George Eliot quote runs through my mind on a daily basis, whether I'm parking the car or loading my groceries or walking down a Portsmouth street. We're all in this together, and when we make an effort to intentionally engage with one another, we add to the many layers that make us human. It may be simplistic, but if I can layer some form of this message enough times into everything I do, then maybe, just maybe, it will reverberate wider and wider, and the world will become a kinder, safer place for all. Now, for a little layered history. I spent my roaring 20s living it up in New York City. My sister and I opened a little shop just past Soho called French General. We set it up like an old general store. It was a quantity of quality old goods. So for the shop, we were traveling to flea markets, antique shops, estate sales, selecting odd objects. We traveled to London and France to find unusually unique ephemera, bringing the past into the present and gaining a following of artists and creatives and unique personalities that love to hang out in the shop, connecting with one another around these similar interests. This whole experience solidified my obsession with collecting pieces of other people's lives. And it was here, in New York, armed with all these objects, vintage photos, letters, diary pages, that I was asked for the very first time to create a piece of artwork. My good friend Jason, who worked for GLAAD, the Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation, asked me to make and donate art for an upcoming auction. I was thrilled to contribute. To support a cause I truly believe in with artwork, that seemed like a dream. I'd never made a piece of artwork. but I had a lot of ideas, and I had a lot of feelings that I thought could go into it. And so the literal layers began. I made a collage. First layer was vintage wallpaper to evoke a home. Next layer was typed up pages of my own thoughts and feelings, hopes and desires. And over that I pinned with these juicy old glass head pins, vintage photos of women that I'd cut in half and then sewn back together, one from the other. It was to evoke this feeling that we are all filled with multitudes and we are all one and each other. Layering these things on top of each other, it's on purpose that you couldn't actually read more than a few words behind the women. Like humans themselves, the whole story can't be seen from the surface. The message is left up to the viewer. They sort through their own layers, and whatever they bring to it is what's meant to be felt. So this one artwork, and the idea that there might be more someday, is what got me hooked on estate sales. I love estate sales. I know a lot of people find them depressing, but I find them so inspiring. They're full of imaginary stories with real human life lived. Right in the door, before I do any looking around, I ask the people running the sale for as many details as they can give me about the person or family that lived there. It's a gift to enter someone's home and carefully go through their life layers, to see, feel, hold, and ultimately create art with objects that this person carried and kept through the years. A pair of glasses, a letter opener, a pin cushion, or scissors, or pencils with little teeth marks. I can see the wear. I can see the fingerprints where they held something over and over, the tiny letters they wrote on a label and stuck on a jar. It feels pretty special that I get to peek into a total stranger's life and then continue to hold their energy in these objects and then layer them together to tell a new story in my artwork. And even though they're no longer here, I'm sharing some part of their existence with you now. Once I started collage, I couldn't stop. I made little layered collages constantly, offered them as greeting cards, I sold them at our shop, I sold them at art fairs. It almost felt like I was getting away with something. No longer was I the only one holding the many thoughts and feelings running through my head. I'd found a way to communicate. I was getting these tiny messages out, and people were relating to them. They wanted to have them too. In those early days, they were mostly vintage photos layered with old handwritten notebook pages. And tons of them were about love. Because I was madly in love. In New York City, I met Ryan, the man I eventually married, who just happens to be a local Portsmouth boy. Hence we live here now. And we actually celebrate 20 years of marriage this year. Thanks. And it turns out creating collages about love came easily. I love love. In the same way I'd layered my thoughts and feelings into that first collage piece, I kept doing it in the rest of my work. In fact, I'm going to tell you a little secret. I haven't told everybody this, but there are hundreds of artworks of mine out there that actually have a secret note to Ryan layered in there somewhere. Okay, in my next strata, we moved to San Francisco, and we grew those little collage greeting cards into a full wholesale business called 8mm Ideas. We had multiple reps, we had hundreds of stores, and thousands of layered messages being sent all over the world. We were beside ourselves. We left our day jobs. And our new reality was tons and tons of boxes layered on top of one another in the middle of our apartment as we packed and shipped orders for the next several years. San Francisco is also where I got to do a deep dive into becoming an artist. I got my very first studio in an arts building, and I met my friend Matt, who was an accomplished painter. And he pushed me to create more work, bigger work, and to actually show the work. My collages were now becoming more 3D with the physical objects I'd been collecting over all these years. The glasses, the notebooks, the jars, the frames. Those now were layered over the diary pages and vintage photos. And I was inventing these elaborate stories, full-on characters to go along with each piece. This, probably my most deeply layered within layers large work at a show in San Francisco called 4x4. I created 4 different characters going through the 4 stages of life as believed in Hinduism. Each box is a collage, a kind of snapshot collage of a stage, or in this situation, a layer of life. There's the student who goes out to learn about life, the householder, where one builds a family and a home, the hermit, my favorite stage, where one retires and lives in the forest, and, and the renunciate stage, where one renounces worldly goods and seeks enlightenment. So many created stories, so much life, so many different lives are layered in each one of these boxes. So it turns out the work comes really easily when I let someone else take over. Now, this someone actually just lives in my mind. But it's possibly a culmination of the many layers I've encountered in people over the years. I have tons of these characters talking to me in my brain. And as I make the work, this person comes to life. It's almost as if they tell me what to include, what layers need to be added to reverberate energy that someone else will notice, that someone else can relate to. In these prolific years of mine, with these characters in my mind, these objects in my hands, I made more artwork than even I can remember. And it turns out I rarely took photos. I have photos of almost none of it, and if I do, they're about as good as this. This is the only photo I have of that show. Because I felt the whole purpose was to get the work into other people's hands. I didn't see a point of making something so I could keep it. I wanted it out there. I wanted other people who needed it to have it. So I did lots of group shows. I created some really memorable solo shows. I continued to make and donate work to events that raised money for mental health, human rights, animal rescues, and everyday human concerns. Donating my work, including a layer of giving in all of this, has always been hugely important to me. After 10 years in San Francisco, it was time for another big change. Time to add a new layer to our life. We moved to Los Angeles. I was lucky to get a studio in downtown LA, and I shifted the focus of my work slightly. Still lots of layers, but pared down. No longer did I aim to make the meaning kind of obstructed or coy, because in the mid-2000s, it started to feel paramount to make the important messages front and center. I've always had a great love for quotes. I've collected them since childhood. I have books and books full of handwritten and cut out of things. Quotes from the wise and the wonderful. And I wanted these powerful words to be the focus. Here's the wisdom from left to right: Albert Einstein, George Orwell, Lewis Carroll, and Mary Oliver. They're all layers of vintage paper, handwritten notebook or diary pages, old maps, love letters, collected ephemera, and old book pages. Each piece in that layer is chosen intentionally for each quote, which I type on an old typewriter, and then I sew all the layers together. One of the highlights of this time period was creating over 100 of them and mounting them on book covers, all the colors of the rainbow, for my 2019 show, Same But Different, in San Francisco during Pride Month. The title comes from something my niece Sophia said when she was really little. I can't remember what it was, but we were trying to explain something to her, these two things, and she responded, oh, same, but different. And I thought, yeah, like all of us, like everything. I also gave the show this title because it's the idea that we can all approach the same words, the authors on the back of the piece, but depending on what life layers you're bringing to it, for each of us, it sits different. There's another phrase that also shows up in my work during this time, and it's never gone away. It's not said by any great philosopher, but by many of us in response to an overwhelming feeling so many people struggle with. You are not alone in this. I made one small layered collage with these words for a friend who was going through a hard time. And before I knew it, I'd turned it into an ongoing project of over 100 pieces and still counting that would be spread across the world. People wanted them for friends. They wanted it for themselves. And then I started sending them to strangers, people I recognized could use the message. Someone who'd lost a parent or was grieving, journalists whose stories I'd read and couldn't ignore, or people online who wrote about their loneliness. I made a postcard that I now include with every piece that ships out, and it reads in part, "This work is part of a series, and each one lives with a human like you, a person you probably don't know yet, but I bet you have a lot of feelings in common. For now, they are all sharing this message with you because I promise you are not alone in this." I feel so lucky that by laying down layers of positivity, putting together objects of good energy and sharing them, walking through life with an eye towards the service of others, I've often been commissioned for my artwork. And when I'm commissioned to do large public works, that's super awesome. But it's the request to do personal pieces, when people share objects of their life with me. That makes me understand the power we have together. And that's the real joy in all this. The extremely personal connection with people, not only those who buy my work, but those who just see it and get something from it and let me know. That's been the very best part all along. Over the years, I've tried really hard to keep all my work pursuits in the artistic realm. And one of the ways I've been able to do that is leading creative arts workshops for over 20 years. My aim is not only to introduce a new craft, but to allow people to find their own layers of creativity. I'm really just a cheerleader. And then include that energy in everything that we make together, whether it be collage or bookmaking, weaving or block printing. It was Jen who actually said to me, "Molly, workshops are like the perfect marriage of adding life layers by meeting new people and working with physical layers by creating new art." And finally, this is the work I'm doing now. It's textiles. It's all vintage textiles, but mixed with a lot of hand-dyed, naturally dyed textiles that I stitch together and then put a quote and stitch the quote on. And I love this quote. This is George Saunders, and I highly recommend, if you Google George Saunders with that phrase, to listen to his entire speech. They're really wise words to live by. It's been a huge honor to have led this life so far. Every art show I've had, every commission I've made, every workshop I've led, it's been amazing. But I swore I would admit this to you, that even with all of that, it's taken me a long time to sort through the personal layers of doubt and anxiety and call myself an artist. To have added so many of these surprising, heartfelt layers into my being, including this one with all of you today, it's a dream I didn't even know I had until it happened. And it's definitely made me a more full and better human for others. We all know this world is in a very fragile state. My hope is that we are all aiming to be the best humans possible for one another by inviting as many varied layers as we can into our lives. So, with that in mind, I'd like to make something with you all. Our volunteers are going to be passing out these little circles of vintage paper. You might not get one that looks like this, but there's vintage wallpaper, there's vintage receipts from an old French hat company, there's vintage children's notebook paper. And once you get this circle, you're getting this because I'd like to create a layered piece of artwork with you. Once you get this circle, if you would please turn them over to the blank side. And I know on the checkered one it doesn't look blank, but just turn it over because one side is going to show up and the other side, the part you write on, is not going to show. It's going to be your secret layer in this piece. So if you would turn them over and write as many or as few things you'd like, people or things that make up the layers in you. And then on your way out, we have a gold box at the edge of the door. If you drop them in that gold box on your way out. 2025 is the year of the snake. And each of these pieces will be layered together, designed side up, with your written contribution, a hidden layer inside, to create a snake that will vibrate with your combined energy. Celebrating 10 years of Creative Mornings falls right into place with things the snake symbolizes: intelligence, regeneration, and wisdom. I also love that the hour of the snake specifically is 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. It's the time when the sun warms up the earth, usually, and it's also the time of day that we come together for Creative Mornings. I'd like to thank each and every person for being here today. A special thanks to the Creative Mornings team, and especially every employee that gets here bright and early to put up with all of us at the music hall. And to each one of you, thank you so much for being here, for letting me speak, and for joining in this collage that will eventually be put together.
Molly, can you come back?
Goodness.